Victoria Williams Henderson stood perfectly still on the giant terrace. Below her, the lights of New York City twinkled like a million tiny stars. Around her, rich people in fancy clothes laughed and clinked their champagne glasses together. But Victoria wasn't laughing. She wore her work uniform, blue coveralls with grease stains on the knees. Her hands were rough from years of fixing helicopters. Her short hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked completely different from everyone else at this party. And that's exactly why Richard Blackstone had called her up here. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard shouted, his voice booming across the terrace. He was a tall man with silver hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. "I want you all to meet someone very special." The crowd turned to look. Victoria could feel their stares like tiny needles on her skin. Richard put his arm around Victoria's shoulder. She wanted to pull away, but she stayed calm. Her son Michael was somewhere in the crowd, watching. She had to be strong for him. "This wonderful woman," Richard continued, his voice dripping with fake sweetness, "is Victoria Williams Henderson. She fixes my helicopters. Isn't that amazing?" Some people clapped politely. Others whispered to each other behind their hands. Victoria's jaw tightened. She knew what was coming. Richard Blackstone was famous for his cruel games. He loved making people feel small. It made him feel big. "Now, Victoria here told me something interesting," Richard said, walking toward the edge of the terrace where a beautiful red helicopter sat waiting. Its metal body gleamed under the party lights. "She told me she used to fly helicopters. Can you believe that?" The crowd murmured. A woman in a sparkly dress giggled. Victoria's heart pounded in her chest, but her face stayed calm. She had learned long ago not to show fear. Richard walked around the helicopter, running his finger along its smooth surface. This beauty cost $12 million. $12 million. He spun around to face Victoria. "So I have a proposition for you, Miss Henderson." "Here it comes," Victoria thought. "I dare you to fly this helicopter around my building. Just one trip around. If you can do it, and I mean do it perfectly, no mistakes, I will give your son Michael 50% of my entire fortune." The crowd gasped. 50% of Richard Blackstone's fortune was billions of dollars. Billions. Victoria's mind raced. Where was Michael? She scanned the crowd and found him. Her 19-year-old son stood near the back, his eyes wide with shock. He was supposed to be at aviation school, learning to be a pilot. That was his dream. But school was expensive, and they were struggling to pay for it. "But," Richard continued, his smile growing wider and meaner, "if you fail, if you crash, if you can't do it, if you chicken out, you must sign this document." He pulled out a paper from his jacket pocket and held it up high. "This document says you lied about your skills. It says you're not good enough, and I will post it online for millions of people to see. Everyone will know you failed." The crowd was silent now. Some people looked uncomfortable. A woman named Sarah shifted nervously. Margaret Whitmore, an older lady with kind eyes, frowned. But others looked excited, like they were watching a boxing match. Richard walked right up to Victoria. He was so close she could smell his expensive cologne. "So what do you say, Miss Henderson? Are you brave enough? Or are you just a mechanic who talks big?" Victoria looked at Richard's cold eyes. She looked at the helicopter. She looked at her son. Michael's face was pale. He was shaking his head slightly, telling her no. "Don't do it, Mom. It's not worth it." But Victoria knew something Richard didn't know. Something nobody at this party knew. She took a deep breath. "I'll do it," she said quietly. The crowd erupted in noise. People shouted and gasped. Camera phones came out everywhere. Someone started a live video stream. Richard's smile grew even bigger. "Excellent. Sign here first." He shoved a paper and a pen at her. Victoria read it carefully. The words were designed to destroy her reputation. "I, Victoria Williams Henderson, admit that I am not qualified to fly helicopters. I am only a mechanic. I lied about my abilities." Her hand trembled slightly as she signed her name. Richard snatched the paper away. "Wonderful. Now let's see if you can actually fly this thing." He walked to the helicopter and opened the door with a dramatic flourish. "Your chariot awaits, Miss Henderson." Victoria walked slowly toward the helicopter. Each step felt heavy. The crowd pressed closer, their phones held high, recording everything. Michael pushed through the people. "Mom, don't, please." She turned to look at her son, her beautiful boy who loved airplanes since he was 3 years old, who built model helicopters from cardboard boxes, who dreamed of flying above the clouds. "Trust me," she whispered. Then Victoria Williams Henderson climbed into the pilot's seat. Richard stood back, his arms crossed, that terrible smile still on his face. He had no idea what was about to happen. Nobody did. Victoria settled into the pilot's seat, like she was coming home. Her hands moved across the controls with perfect confidence. She didn't fumble. She didn't hesitate. She touched each button and switched like she was greeting old friends. The crowd watched, confused. This didn't look like someone who was nervous. This looked like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Richard's smile flickered for just a second. Victoria pulled out a worn notebook from her coverall pocket. She began her pre-flight checklist, speaking softly to herself. Fuel levels, check. Hydraulics, check. Rotor system, check. "What's she doing?" someone in the crowd whispered. "She actually knows the checklist," another person answered, sounding surprised. Margaret Whitmore stepped closer, watching carefully. Something was different about Victoria now. The quiet mechanic had transformed into someone else entirely. Victoria put on the headset and flipped a switch. Her voice came through crisp and professional. "Tower, this is November 73 Charlie Bravo, requesting clearance for pattern flight around Blackstone Tower, current position rooftop helipad." The crowd went silent. That wasn't how a nervous person talked. That was military precision. A voice crackled back through the radio. "November 73 Charlie Bravo, you are clear for pattern flight. Maintain 500 feet. Wind is calm. Good luck up there. Roger, Tower." November 73 Charlie Bravo acknowledges. Richard's face changed. The smile was gone. He looked worried. Victoria's hands danced across the controls. The helicopter's engine roared to life. The rotors began to spin, slowly at first, then faster and faster until they were a blur above her head. The wind from the rotors blew across the terrace. Women grabbed their fancy hats. Men held on to their ties. Everyone stepped back. Everyone except Michael. He stood frozen, staring at his mother. Victoria looked at him through the helicopter window. She gave him a small smile. Then she mouthed 2 words. "Watch this." The helicopter lifted off the ground. It rose smoothly, perfectly level. Not a wobble, not a shake. It hung in the air for a moment, and then Victoria tilted it forward and began to fly. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed. "She's actually doing it." The helicopter swept around the corner of the building. Victoria's movements were so smooth, it looked like the helicopter was dancing. She banked left, perfectly controlled. The city lights reflected off the shiny red metal. Inside the cockpit, Victoria's face was calm. Her eyes scanned the instruments. Her hands made tiny adjustments to the controls. This was easier than the combat missions she'd flown in the military, easier than the rescue operations in thunderstorms, easier than landing on aircraft carriers in the middle of the ocean. But the crowd didn't know any of that yet. Richard pulled out his phone, his hands shaking. The live video stream already had 10,000 viewers, then 20,000, then 50,000. People all over the world were watching Victoria fly. "She's going to crash," Richard said loudly, trying to sound confident. "Any second now. You'll see. She'll panic and crash." But Victoria didn't crash. She flew around the second corner of the building, maintaining perfect altitude. The helicopter responded to her touch like it was part of her body. Marina Blackwood, one of Richard's wealthy friends, grabbed his arm. "Richard, she's really good. Like, really, really good." "Shut up," Richard snapped. The helicopter came around the third corner. The crowd could see Victoria clearly now through the window. Her face was focused but relaxed. She looked happy, and then she did something nobody expected. She spoke into the radio. and her voice came through the building's outdoor speakers. Richard had set them up so everyone could hear Victoria panicked or ask for help. Ladies and gentlemen, Victoria's voice rang out, clear and strong. My name is Victoria Williams Henderson, but that's not the whole truth. The crowd leaned forward, listening. My full name is Colonel Victoria Williams Henderson, United States Air Force, retired. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I flew helicopters for 8 years in the military. Apache attack helicopters. Rescue missions. Combat zone. I have over 3,000 flight hours. I have medals for valor and exceptional service. Richard's face turned bright red. After the military, I didn't just fix helicopters, Victoria continued, her voice steady as she guided the helicopter around the fourth and final corner. I built a company, Henderson Aviation Solutions. Maybe you've heard of it. Margaret Whitmore's eyes went wide. Henderson Aviation? That's a $50 million company. They consult for airlines. And I run it, Victoria said through the speakers. I'm the CEO. I have 43 employees. We do business in 12 countries. The helicopter approached the landing pad now, descending smoothly. So why was I fixing Richard Blackstone's helicopters tonight? Victoria asked. The helicopter touched down with barely a bump. Perfect landing. Because 3 days ago, Richard threatened to destroy my company if I didn't come to his party and work for free. He said he would spread lies about my business. He said he would tell people we weren't safe. The rotors began to slow down. He uses his power to hurt people. He makes them feel small so he can feel big. But I'm not small. I never was. Victoria shut down the engine. The rotors stopped spinning. She took off her headset and opened the door. She stepped out of the helicopter, and the crowd erupted in noise. Richard stood frozen, his face pale now instead of red. Victoria walked straight toward him. The crowd parted like she was a queen walking through her kingdom. I believe, Victoria said calmly, you owe my son 50% of your fortune. Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish. No words came out. Michael ran forward and hugged his mother tight. Mom, you were amazing. But why didn't you tell me? Because some people only learn when they see the truth with their own eyes, Victoria said, looking directly at Richard. The live video stream now had 500,000 viewers. Comments flooded in. She's a colonel? Richard Blackstone just got destroyed. This is the best thing I've ever seen. But Victoria wasn't done. Not even close. She pulled out her phone and pressed a few buttons. I have one more thing to share with all of you nice people, she said loudly, and with the 500,000 people watching online. Richard's eyes went wide with fear. What are you doing? Showing everyone who you really are, Victoria said. And then she began to speak. Victoria's voice rang out across the terrace, clear and strong. For the past 3 months, I've been documenting everything, she said, holding up her phone. Richard Blackstone hired my company to maintain his helicopter fleet, but he refused to pay us. $200,000 he owes us. $200,000 he refuses to give to a woman-owned business. The crowd murmured. People pulled out their phones, recording everything. But that's not all, Victoria continued. She swiped her phone screen. Richard also hasn't paid his taxes in 5 years. I have the documents. He hides his money in fake companies overseas. He cheats the government out of millions of dollars every single year. Richard's face turned white as snow. You can't prove that. You're lying. Am I? Victoria asked calmly. She turned to face the cameras that were streaming everything live. I've already sent all the evidence to the IRS and to the FBI and to every major news organization in New York City. The live stream viewers exploded. 1 million people watching now. Then 2 million. Margaret Whitmore stepped forward. Richard, is this true? Have you been cheating on your taxes? I. Richard stammered. Robert Chun, another businessman in the crowd, pulled out his own phone. Holy cow, it's already on the news. Billionaire Richard Blackstone under investigation for tax fraud. Victoria kept talking. Richard doesn't just cheat the government. He cheats everyone. He doesn't pay his workers fair wages. He steals ideas from small companies and crushes them with lawsuits. He ruins people's lives because he thinks his money makes him untouchable. Sarah, who had been quiet this whole time, suddenly spoke up. He did that to my brother. Richard stole his restaurant idea and forced him out of business. He did it to my cousin, too, another voice called out. And my sister. More and more people in the crowd began sharing their stories. Richard had hurt so many people. He had used his power like a weapon for years and years. Richard looked around wildly. His friends were backing away from him. Even his closest business partners were putting distance between themselves and him. This is ridiculous. Richard shouted, I am Richard Blackstone. I'm worth billions. You can't do this to me. I just did, Victoria said quietly. Michael stood beside his mother, tears running down his face. But they weren't sad tears. They were proud tears. His mom was a hero. Victoria turned to address the cameras one more time. I want everyone watching to know something important. Richard thought he could humiliate me because I'm a black woman, because I was wearing work clothes instead of a fancy dress, because I fixed things with my hands instead of sitting in a big office. She paused, making sure everyone was listening. But your job doesn't define your worth. Your clothes don't define your worth. The color of your skin doesn't define your worth. What defines you is how you treat other people. And Richard Blackstone treats people like garbage. The crowd erupted in applause. It started with Margaret, then Sarah, then Robert, then everyone. Even Richard's own security guards were clapping. Richard looked around in horror. His perfect birthday party had become his worst nightmare. You'll pay for this, he hissed at Victoria. I'll sue you. I'll destroy you. No, you won't, said a new voice. Everyone turned to see two people in dark suits walking onto the terrace. They had badges clipped to their belts. Richard Blackstone? One of them asked. Yes. Richard's voice shook. I'm Special Agent Morrison, FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest. Tax evasion, fraud, money laundering, and several other charges. You need to come with us. The crowd gasped. This was better than any movie. Richard's legs seemed to give out. He sat down hard on the ground. No, this can't be happening. As the agents led Richard away in handcuffs, he looked back at Victoria one last time. How? He whispered. How did you do this? Victoria smiled. It wasn't a mean smile. It was a smile of someone who had fought hard and won. You taught me something tonight, Richard, she said. You taught me that bullies only win when good people stay quiet. So I decided to stop being quiet. 3 months later, Michael Williams sat in the cockpit of a training helicopter, his instructor beside him. Nice work, Michael, the instructor said. You're a natural just like your mom. Michael grinned. His tuition was fully paid now, not from Richard's money. Richard had gone to prison, and all his money was being used to pay back the people he'd cheated. Instead, Michael's school was paid for by his mother's company, which had grown bigger than ever. After the video of Victoria went viral, companies all over the world wanted to work with Henderson Aviation Solutions. They wanted to work with a company that stood for honesty and courage. Victoria stood on the ground, watching her son practice flying. Margaret Whitmore stood beside her. You changed everything you know, Margaret said. Half the people at that party have started foundations to help small businesses. We're all trying to be better because of you. Victoria shook her head. I just told the truth. That's all any of us should do. Up in the sky, Michael flew his helicopter in a perfect circle, just like his mom had taught him. Victoria's phone buzzed. Another contract. Another company wanted to work with her. Another opportunity to prove that doing the right thing was always worth it. She thought about Richard, sitting in his prison cell. She didn't hate him. She actually felt a little sorry for him. He had spent his whole life building an empire on lies and cruelty, and it had all fallen apart in one night. Meanwhile, Victoria had built her life on hard work, honesty, and respect. And her empire was just beginning. Mom! Michael called down through the radio. Did you see that landing? I saw it. Victoria called back. Perfect form. As the sun set over New York City, Victoria Williams Henderson smiled. She had taught the world an important lesson. Never underestimate someone just because they look different from you. Never think someone is weak just because they're quiet. And never, ever think that money makes you better than other people. Because in the end, the only thing that really matters is how you treat people. And that's a lesson Richard Blackstone learned too late. Did this story of courage and justice touch your heart? If you loved watching Victoria stand up to a bully and prove that honesty and skill win in the end, like this story and share it with someone who needs to hear that they're stronger than they think. Subscribe to hear more amazing stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Remember, you are worth more than anyone's cruel words. You are powerful. You are enough. Never let anyone make you feel small.